NICUnity. This is part two of our discussion with Darla Vasquez and Thais Leverett about overcoming eating challenges with your tube-fed NICU baby. In the first part of our discussion with Darla and Ty, we heard about their NICU experiences with their babies and what those first couple of years looked like for them and their families caring for a tube-fed baby at home. We also talked about the messaging they received while in the NICU and after that about what their expectations should be for their children. In this episode, we'll hear about their respective journeys to helping their children become tube-free, and we'll also learn more about the course Darla created to support families on their path to weaning their children off their tubes. As a disclaimer, we do want to mention that any mention of a product or brand is not an endorsement of such by NICU Parent Network. These discussions are not meant to replace medical advice. You should always consult with your baby's care team to determine the best course of treatment for your child. Okay, let's dive into part two of NICUnity Health, Overcoming Eating Challenges.
Hi, I'm really interested to know when you started the real food and when you started blending. About how old was he?
He was about, let me say, I want to say like 5 or 6,
Yeah.
because we just weren't seeing results with the formula. And we had switched the formulas a couple of times, and they sent us to like the super duper enriched concentrated one to try to get him more calories. And it was like, okay, if this is not working, let's just give him food. And so we stumbled upon real food blends, and we were like, all right, this sounds like, something good. He's getting the balance. He's getting exposed to different things from a gastrointestinal perspective as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
We want to make sure, he can tolerate things. Does he have any allergies that we're not aware of, because he hasn't done anything but formula, so we don't even know. Of course, intermittently, we would try to give him little food by mouth, and he would take a little applesauce or he would taste things, but nothing considerable, for him in terms of oral feeding. So the real food blends we
Mm-hmm.
thought was a good solution, and he did fine with all of them. Still very slow to grow, but he did fine with that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is one thing I will say. What I didn't mention when we were talking about voices and the NICU is
Mm-hmm.
that I would like there to be a lot more talking about real food and using real food instead of
Mm-hmm.
formula, at least as an option, because there's
Right.
so much research that shows that kids that are on those real food blends do so much better. They may not grow as much as, if you're on a Pediasure or some
Mm-hmm.
other kind of formula, but their prognosis is much better. They develop better, and they have better complexions for the most part. And there's a lot of different research, so it's a
Mm-hmm.
good thing for the NICU community to at least discuss it, and for parents to know
For
that it
sure.
is an option. And there are
Yeah.
more and more insurances that are starting to cover it. May take a little
Mm.
more advocating, but I definitely think that's something that should be brought up, especially if your child's not tolerating the feeds.
For
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. So Darla, let's fast forward a little bit and talk about what the process was to getting your son off of the tube feeding. Because it sounds like it was, feeding was really rough with all of the vomiting and having your empty formula cans all over the house. So tell me, how you went from that to being tube free.
Yeah, we tried to wean from home using an online program, outside support. And what we saw was that when our son wasn't on the tube, he was so happy. It was an
Mm.
instantaneous change. There was no vomiting. There was just so much happiness, more development happening in just a very short period of time that we weaned him. Unfortunately, our local medical team was not willing to follow the recommendations of our other medical team as far as weight gain. They wanted
Mm-hmm.
him to gain back the weight from the wean faster. And so we had to put him back on the tube. And when we put him back on the tube, pretty much at that moment when everything started again, the oral aversion just all of a sudden started, the vomiting all of a sudden
Really?
started. That was the moment my husband and I were like, whoa, it clicked.
Hmm.
Like, this
Right.
is not, we don't even know our son because this tube and what's happening in his, you know, gastrointestinal system is causing him so much trouble and pain.
Hmm.
We don't even know who he is. And
Mm.
so what we did was, at that time, I was blessed to be taking care of him full time, and so I was able to take him to a an inpatient program that was 4 hours away. We went inpatient
Mm.
for
Hmm.
30 days, and I remember getting to that interview and the psychologist talking to me, and she told me, "Your son should not be vomiting multiple times a day. That's a problem." And I just it was like the sky opened up and the
Right.
clouds clouds parted and God descended himself. I was like, thank you. That's so
Right.
right. He shouldn't be vomiting, right? That makes sense,
Absolutely.
right?
Right. Right.
And really, in 30 days in that program, which in my opinion met the full needs of, so many of his needs, and really focused on his strengths. He was able to get off the tube and never went back. And I
Mm.
thought to myself, not in the moment, I was just happy. But
Right.
years later, I thought to myself, and why I started my course in the first place was I thought, this is just a really big shame because there are so many people like Ty who have other children that she can't just leave and go 4 hours away. This was my first child. So I was only taking care of him, and that was my responsibility. It's a big deal to take care of him, by the way.
Mhm.
But that I wasn't working at that time, outside the home. But there are other families that don't have the insurance that will cover it, and we did.
Right.
We had the insurance that would cover it, and many other different reasons why people can't just drop what they're doing and go 4 hours away. But
Hmm.
in 30 days, our whole life changed. And I
Right.
thought, well, this information needs to be passed along. It doesn't need to
Hmm.
be that you have to go 4 hours away, that you have to be inpatient, because there are a lot of things that we did to meet his unique needs that all families can do if they really know. Like Ty talked
Right.
about moving him to real food when he was 5. I mean, perhaps if he had been moved to real food earlier, if she had been educated that there were those options. Of course, it
Hmm.
was, 10 years ago at this point. So there were limited options back then, right? Just like
Sure.
mine is almost 12. But then she could have made a different decision because there was only three
Hmm.
years between 5 and 8 when he got off the tube. Maybe he would have
Sure.
Right.
only been on it for 3 years. So,
Right.
what can we do to support our families
Hmm.
in this process so that they don't feel like we're stuck on the tube, we're stuck in this bad situation?
Hmm.
Not that the tube is always a bad situation. I definitely don't want to send that message. Some kids
Right.
really
Right.
need it. I'm speaking to families where there is no medical reason why your child is still on the tube except that your child is on the tube. That those are
Mm.
that is my
Right.
audience there. So that's what I'm
Right.
speaking to. But that's really what we need to discuss more of. How can we
Hmm.
support each individual family like that?
Yeah. So what kinds of things happened in those 30 days when you were at that clinic?
Well, we called it feeding boot camp.
Hmm.
He ate 5 times a day, which, when you really think about it, I mean, he was eating every 3 hours, so he was eating 8 times a day. They were very focused on the wean and focused on him getting the food that he was best at eating, whatever he
Mhm.
could eat the best, that's what they focused on. And so when we went in to the program, like he could only do crunchy and puree. He wasn't really very good at drinking. And so we did a lot of like Ty talked about, boosting up those calories in those purees, because if he
Mhm.
could eat the purees, then we just had to supplement, with water. And
Yeah.
I mean, if all you have to do is give your child water at night, that's a totally different dynamic than having to have a feed. If nothing else, you don't have to worry about, is the formula going bad? When do
Right.
I have to change this? How
Yes.
long does it last?
Yes.
Do I have to put it on ice? What if it's cold when
Right.
I put it in the stomach? Like all those
Right.
things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Don't let it be
Yeah.
cold, and the vomiting really happens. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. So what about you, Ty? What was that journey for you guys to become tube free?
Yeah, so yeah, you definitely said a lot, Darla, that I can totally relate to. Like I said at the beginning of this, I wish your class existed when I was going through this. Um, but just in terms of getting him to the point where he was off of the feeds. So I too had considered an inpatient opportunity for him. I was like, okay, this is not working, continuing to have him tube fed. He's not growing. He's not developing in the way that, every medical professional we interact with is saying that he should. So what are my
Mhm.
alternatives? And that's literally one of the things I was considering. And you're absolutely right. I was trying to figure out how I could get off of work, make sure everybody else was taken care of so I can go and get this done.
Mhm.
So as an alternative to that, kind of things happen serendipitously. I was considering that at this particular time. And then he was also showing more interest in eating certain things. Like you could get him to eat a
Mhm.
little cup of applesauce. You can get him to eat, small, softer things. Still had a problem with drinking for
Mhm.
the longest time. That was the last thing we actually mastered. But we could start seeing food as an interest to him, eating it by mouth.
Mhm.
But every time you would tube feed him, that interest went away. And I'm like, okay, you can't get someone to be excited about eating if they're already full. I'm like, just
Mm.
logically,
Right.
it doesn't make sense. It
Sure.
was like the old school Ozempic, right? If they're not interested in eating, they're not going to eat. So I started thinking, all right, what if we feed him less via tube and see if that stimulates him wanting to eat more? And it in fact did, but that was completely not what his nutritionist or his pediatrician wanted us to do. Like
Mm.
if you do that, he's not going to get enough calories. You're going to see weight loss. We don't advise against that. We're going to still continue to try to get him to eat by mouth and feed him the same amount of tube feeding. And me being slightly rebellious, if you couldn't tell already, I said, we're going to have to do something different because otherwise he's
Mhm.
going to continue to be relying on the tube. So kind of as an
Yep.
at-home experiment, that's what we did. You get less tube feeds, but we're putting more food in front of you for you to eat by mouth. And slowly
Mhm.
but surely, we would notice, he has a total predilection for sweet foods. We're like, listen, all of your teeth are going to fall out. You can't only eat sweets. But we did, like you mentioned, Darla, that you learned at the clinic, kind of allow him to eat things that we knew he would eat, at least to start. Like, I'm not going to
Mhm.
try to introduce broccoli to a kid that would be like, no, just give me the tube.
It's
So
definitely
Right.
not going to help with weight gain, right? That
right. We'll
broccoli's not
just
going to
give
help with
you
weight.
what we know you're going to eat, even if it isn't the
Right.
best at first. And then slowly we try to get him over to more healthy options, which he's way better at now. Like he loves fruits and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Still tough on the veggies, but what 10-year-old isn't beating down the door to eat broccoli anyway? So
Yeah.
I'm not even mad about that.
Right.
But it came to a point, just with our medical team, I'll call them our team. And again, I understand their philosophy. I understand their reasoning for wanting to keep him on the tube. Like I get it. I really do.
Mhm.
But just as his parents and more so the loudmouth, me, I was like, we have to do something different. So
Mhm.
I propose that we keep the tube in. We don't remove it just yet, but we're not going to tube feed him. We're going to see what we can do. I was like, just give me a month. So 30
Right.
days, I guess that's the magic
Yep.
number.
There you
Give me
go.
a month and let's see what we can do. If he loses a significant amount of weight, then okay, I will go back to your recommendations in terms of the tube feeding, supplementing with food,
Mhm.
and seeing what we can do. But if he doesn't lose, I wasn't even saying let him gain a bunch of weight, just let him not lose weight. And
Right.
I'll call that a win. And then we'll
Mhm.
consider removing the tube because at this point, Tubi bothered him more. He wanted it. He wanted it out, even though you still couldn't touch it. I'm like, well, for us to get it out, we're gonna have to touch it. And he was like, I don't want you touching it, so we're gonna figure that out. But I said, let's just try it. So successfully for that month, we were able to feed him. At this point, he kind of started eating, a little bit more food and a little bit more meats. And, we could kind of get him to consume more by mouth, getting better with drinking. So we would give him, the Pediasures and things like that. He didn't really like the shake based one. So they even have a juice form of that. And that was more of his preference.
More tolerable, right?
Education and knowing what the options are, right, Darla? There's all kind of stuff out there. You just got to find it.
Yes.
Right.
So we end up going to his gastro and the nutritionist, their offices are in the same facility. So it usually they would come in together. And I was like, today's today, we're taking the tube out. And they're like, are you sure? Because if he has lost, we're gonna have to put it back. I said, nope. Today's the day we're taking the tube out. And you almost had to hold him down to get it out because he was full of anxiety. And that's another thing, you're building up anxiety, tube anxiety, and this is something that obviously he still, probably has some lingering effects from. But they took the tube out finally, and we're tube free. And I had it in my hand after it was removed. And I asked my son, I said, we have to be thankful for this because this is what kept you alive and healthy all this time. I said, what do you want mommy to do with it? Do you want to keep the tubie or do we want to put the tubie in the trash? I will let you decide. He was like, put it in the trash. So I kind of wanted to see it as a memoir, but he was like, nope, put it in the trash. So the Tubi is gone. We look very favorably upon our Tubi times because we know that kept him healthy and alive.
Right.
But we're also happy to be gone. But now, be in a supportive space, much like what you do, Darla. I'm an advocate. I'll tell people about your class all the time now, but to help people make that transition from tube to feeding.
Yeah, I think that's what I'm hearing from both of you is the importance of individualized care.
Yes.
The importance of really meeting the child where they are. And like you said, Darla, with the program that you found, focusing on the strengths of the child. And also as a parent, trusting your intuition, trusting that yes, you understand and you respect where the care team might be differing from what you think is right at the time, and having that respectful, conversation with them that say, like you said, Ty, let me try for a month. Just give me a month, and for them to be able to respect that decision and choice, and and that's what I'm hearing over and over from both of you.
Yeah, definitely. And it's a very scary thing to advocate for that month. And I will say that, Ty talked about kind of being rebellious, so to speak. But you can also tell that she very vigilantly watched his weight, which is so important, during that month for it, if you decide to go on your own to still be.
One of the things that I also kind of wanted to talk about too is the individualized care, the working with your care team, but also really trusting your intuition. Something that you both have said is you are grateful for the tube because it's the reason that your children are alive. And I certainly don't want it to come across that we are anti-tube by any stretch. No. It's just, I think it is it really is about really looking at your child as a child and not a protocol, right? And allowing your child to be on their own timeline. I was talking to an adult preemie just the other day, and she said that one of the things her mother always told her was time is your best friend, because everything that she did was delayed, but it doesn't mean that she wouldn't do it. And so I guess I don't know that I really have a question here, but more
I
of
do
just
have a thought, and maybe this kind of ties into what you were saying here. I think as a parent of someone who is on a tube, you have to really prepare your mind for two contingencies or two possibilities, if you will. So the one would be, what Darla is helping to educate people on is how to transition your child from being G-tube fed to oral feeding and moving on in that path. But I think the alternative and also a very potential reality is your child may not successfully get off the G-tube. So then what? So now it's how can you help your child still have the best life that he or she can have with the tube? And that's stuff I looked at as well. I looked at G-tube fed adults. And they have these, sweet little backpacks where your pump is in there and no one has to know what's going on, and, different stylish covers for your tube if you wanted to, be fashionable with covering your G-tube. So I was trying to look at what could happen if he doesn't come off of the tube. And then how do you start preparing them to be independent so they can make their own food? Maybe it is now they learn how to cook their own food and they're tasting it and doing whatever they need to do, but they learn how to blend their own food and make sure that they can take care of their own nutritional needs. So I think it's almost, you have to simultaneously prepare for either reality. And as a parent, it's just getting your kid to the place where they're going to be okay either way. So to your earlier point, yes, the tube is the thing of our past, and we are very grateful to the tube. And
Yes,
even though my son doesn't know, I still have a spare one that I've kept as the memoir. It wasn't the one that was in him. We always had extras in the house.
Right.
So I still have one of the tubes. And when he's 21, I'm going to be like, look at this. Remember this guy? I will definitely find a great time to embarrass him with that. But
Right.
we're still very thankful that we had that as an intervention, because we know the alternative. If you can't get nutrition, you can't survive. So
right, absolutely. Well, and I think something that Darla, you said very early on, was about your son's quality of life with the tube. I mean, the constant vomiting, and then like the provider at the clinic said that's not okay. And I think that's, again, one of those parts, one of those pieces of the puzzle. But before we finish up, let's talk specifically about the course that you developed, Darla. Obviously, inspired by your personal experience. So, what does it cover, and how would a parent use it?
Yeah, definitely. My course is made to work with it's for families to use with their medical teams. I am a mama with lots of experience who's been trained by some wonderful professionals. But for the safety of your child, it's best to use it with your medical team. And that means you can pass it on to your therapist or your doctor and say, hey, I saw this. Could we try this? Could we use this? It also teaches you how to find that great team, which is so critically important. And it takes you all the way through from finding your team all the way to weaning. So we've got 4 different steps. Through that process, and you can find those on my free training that I have, which is at the eat2growcourse.com /free training, and it has a webinar that you can watch, so you can get a little more information about my program before you jump right on in. Or you can find me at tubie2foodie on Instagram, which is TUBIE TOFOODIE on Instagram, and that will give you a little more resource too.
Great. I like that. Tubie to foodie.
I'm going to follow right now.
Yeah. So we'll be sure when we post, when we share the video, we'll share your contact information and the website and everything. But as we close, are there any final words of encouragement for families, or maybe even friends of families who have a tube-fed child? What is something that you want them to know?
Sure. I'd like to say I wanted to bounce off your idea of the NICU and coming home that you were just talking about. I think that we, as NICU parents, live in, we have to consider trauma-informed care. And we have to consider that the whole time we were in the NICU, our number one concern was, is our child going to live or die? And that is the reality. And if you're like me, you watched a lot of kids pass away, or you lost one yourself. And so we come home with that. and then we try to make decisions, but it's a lot of times based on all that fear that comes with it. Even when our child starts thriving, in the back of our mind it is our child going to survive, or what is the safety of our child? And so
Mhm.
I think it's so important to take care of yourself and to know that as your child grows up, that concern, that the medical needs of your child changes, and your child is not necessarily as critical as your child was in the NICU, and should be treated as such. But it's a process. It's a
Mhm.
process of us taking care of ourselves, and other caretakers taking care of themselves so they can actually care for the child in the current state that the child's in.
Mhm.
And I think that is what I would pass on to other families. Like,
Mhm.
let's enjoy our child as they
Mhm.
grow and develop, and try to deal with that fear, that lingering fear that maybe we will always have a little bit of, especially if
Mhm.
we're one of the um, many that have lost children in the NICU.
Yeah. Thanks, Darla. What about
Would
you, Ty? Any final thoughts?
Sure. Yeah, sure. I would second what Darla shared, and thank you for those words. And I think what you're doing, and obviously what you've dedicated your life to, Kira, is taking care of each other in this space. I think you said that, Darla. So I would say to parents that you're not alone. I mean, we are three moms that have gone
Mhm.
down this journey, but we are part of a broader community of other parents, moms, dads, other caretakers who have done this as well. So I think it's important to, even in the moments where you're uncertain or kind of having those moments of panic that we all have had,
Mhm.
finding the resources and finding us. We are
Mhm.
here. We are here to support you. Even though our journeys may look different, we can still lean on one another while you're trying to navigate this space. Using resources, of course, like Darla's course is a great way to start. But just finding people out there who are available to support you, because we are all here and we're all willing to do so, is also very helpful to parents.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I think that's a beautiful way for us to close our conversation. So thank you so much, Darla and Ty, for joining me today. We are very intentional in our efforts to make participating in NICU Parent Network educational offerings as simple as possible. So please just take a look at our Facebook page, our website under the NICUnity heading, our Instagram, and our LinkedIn page um, for future offerings that we have coming up, as well as recordings of our past events as well. So with that, we'll say thank you, and we'll see you next time.